And hello and welcome back to Around the Museum with Joe and Diane, where we've moved on from living fossils and we're now going into the wonderful world of dinosaurs, which people just seem to love nowadays. All the wonderful kind of diversity that you see in them and the fossils and in movies and everything. People just seem to love this idea of dinosaurs.
Yes, dinosaurs are everywhere these days.
Well, we're gonna delve into them now, Diane, and we're gonna end up doing an episode about some of the more unusual ideas about dinosaurs, things like feathered dinosaurs. We'll also look into some brand new research regarding dinosaurs, soft tissue or original biomolecules as they're called inside dinosaur bones. But why don't we just start with the actual general dinosaur concept itself? What does the word dinosaur mean?
All right, dino refers to big and powerful. It comes from a Greek word. Saurus refers to reptilian creatures like lizards. So it's usually classically said terrible lizards, but terrible in the sense of being
big,
big
large,
and powerful.
Powerful creatures. So great terrors. So who was it who named them dinosaurs?
Well, that name as a scientific name was given by Richard Owen, the founder of the Natural History Museum. And he believed in creation, in spite of the fact that the museum is now a cathedral to evolution.
Yes.
But he believed in creation. He believed they were created. They were the monsters that God made.
And dinosaur study really started in this country. It started in the UK. It was Gideon Mantell's wife, Mary Ann, who found the first, what became known as the first recognised dinosaur to be discovered, as in this new classification of creatures, and that was an iguanodon. We actually have an iguanodon vertebrae here. This is obviously backbone. It's a caudal vertebrae, so that's the base of the tail essentially. And this is from the Isle of Wight, which is the sixth best place in the world for diversity of dinosaur bones, and not many people know that. So it's good to be able to get down there and dig up some bones from time to time. So this is the iguanodon, but the first dinosaur to be named was not actually iguanodon. It was a dinosaur that was found by another scientist, the Reverend William Buckland, and that ended up being called Megalosaurus. So just big
reptile. Yes.
And we actually have a cast of the original is in the Oxford Natural History Museum, which we're never going to get hold of, so we have a cast of it here. So there we have there's obviously the jawbone, you take that down, and this is the top sort of skull, the maxilla, and we've got a lovely set of teeth here, and that was really, I mean, you can kind of see how it gripped the nation and how amazing it was to these scientists like Buckland and Fox and Mantell and Owen, because these are clearly big, sharp-teethed, now extinct, strange-looking kind of creatures, the dinosaur. But before they came up with the term dinosaur, and actually after, they called these creatures something else. What was it that they called them?
They were referred to as dragons, and in fact, in just general conversation, they were called dragons, even by the people who knew that classification term dinosaur, because that was a scientific classification. But people knew about these bones and they were called dragon bones.
And it was just generally regarded that these were the dragons of old, the bones of the dragons of old. And you can see this in the Natural History Museum when you go to they've got that whole gallery, right, with all of the great marine reptiles, the ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs and pliosaurs and the like. And a lot of them are from the old Victorian collections. And so sort of written on in thick black ink, you can see sea dragons. So dragons were just considered to have been real creatures in the past, and when they first started finding these bones, they just naturally assumed that these were the bones of those dragons that were real historical accounts. So that's where it really all started. These two creatures here, Megalosaurus and obviously Iguanodon as well, and it sort of built people up into a frenzy, and off they went and went sort of exploring and digging. There was the big dinosaur rush in the USA when they started finding all these creatures, these great dragon bones, and off they went. And it is something that has sort of fascinated people ever since. Now, when we come to the actual dinosaur bones, let's talk a little bit about some of the processes behind it, because a lot of people are confused or misinformed about what a fossil actually is. And a lot of people think that fossilization means turning something to stone. Well, we've got lots of examples of fossil dinosaur bones here. This is another one from the UK. This is one of the big titanosaur bones, and you can see here, look, Diane, it's actually been squashed. You see how it's squashed on this side? There's a more sort of accurate kind of size of the bone. So it's clearly gone under a lot of pressure. You can see all the cracking in the bone and how it's been crushed, but just have a feel of that, how heavy that is.
Yes.
It's got some good weight to it. So it's actually been preserved once it was crushed. It was crushed during burial, and it's been preserved like that. And you can see all of this amazing detail inside of it as well, this honeycomb structure. So this is the classic way that dinosaurs end up being fossilized. It's a process called permineralization. And we can talk a lot about permineralization because it's really a key to the later episode we'll do about the soft tissue and original biomolecules and stuff like that, and how that all fits into context. But let's just talk about the process of permineralization, because you can see it a little bit clearer here. This is a dinosaur bone that's been sliced, so it's a cross section. So it's effectively a piece of the bone like that that's been taken out of the middle, and you can see all that beautiful honeycomb structure in the middle there as well. So what is this honeycomb structure, Diane, in terms of sort of the biology side of things?
Well, bones are hollow, and inside them, instead of being completely hollow, they do actually have a sort of filigree structure here called cancellous bone, which means a sort of open network or meshwork. And in the middle of that, you've got bone marrow. You've heard of bone marrow, which is what makes blood cells. But around the outside, they're more solid. So this is called compact bone, and it's more solid, but it still has living cells in it, and it still does have tiny, microscopic little channels inside it. And that means that water and whatever is dissolved in it can actually move through that, and we will talk about that later on when we look at some of the newer discoveries. But if you cut a fossil bone through like this, you will see the internal structure of the original bone.
So it's the case that bone being very porous, even the very dense parts of bone are very porous. And so really the process of permineralization is not turning a bone to stone, but it is preserving the bone in stone, in minerals. So permineralization, literally permeated with minerals. It's as simple as that. So it's a bone that's become permeated with minerals, infilled with minerals, and it has preserved all of that original bone inside those minerals. Now, if it is fully permineralized, that is that every single porous part has been filled up with minerals, there shouldn't be very much original soft tissue, original biomolecule left in there, but that's when we'll discuss later about some of the amazing stuff that we are finding, because it really is there. But what I think is just amazing and fascinating is when you're holding that bone there, when you're touching that bone, you're actually touching bone that was inside the dinosaur. It's not been replaced, it's not been turned to stone, it's been permineralized, permeated, literally permeated with minerals. So yes, you really are touching a dinosaur
real
bone
dinosaur,
when you touch a dinosaur bone, and that's just fascinating, I think, to be able to look and think and do. And so that's why a big part of what we do at our creation museums is that hands-on aspect. We want people to be able to come and touch and feel and get up close and personal to these creatures. All right, so we're talking about the bones, but then let's go up to the plaque on the wall, which I know we spoke about in the last series, but it makes a really good point. So let's just briefly recap what we're dealing with here. So this is a Gorosaurus, and it's a cast from a real fossil. Exact replica is what a cast is, so exact copy of a real fossil that was found. And it's in a unique position. It's got its mouth open, it's got its neck bent back, it's got its tail bent over its head, it's got its legs squashed up underneath. So what are we dealing with this dinosaur in terms of how it got buried?
Well, this indicates that it was buried quickly, because this is actually called a death pose, and it is recognised by the secular scientists because it's very common. Now, normally if you go to the museum and they've reconstructed a dinosaur skeleton, they will reconstruct it as if it was alive,
doing a nice little pose
walking.
or something.
That's right. But they are not dug up like that. If you find a whole skeleton like this sort of creature, they are in this distinct head back, tail curved sort of pose. And it is recognised as a death pose because these have died, and probably suddenly, in fact certainly suddenly, if a creature is drowning, you get this spasm in the back muscles to try and literally take your last gasp. But then when the creature dies, of course, the muscles relax, and so you won't get that preserved unless it gets buried straight away, and that's important for our understanding of how things get fossilised.
And it is a quick process, because I think the most recent research suggests that it needs to be buried within 3 minutes of drowning, because after 3 minutes your muscles begin to relax because you no longer have control over them. It's a central nervous system trauma, so it's effectively a shock of electricity that goes down your spine to tense it all up. Once you're dead, you have no control over your muscles, so after 3 minutes you relax, and it's about another 30 minutes before rigor mortis sets in and you go stiff again. So it really is true. In order to get this preserved like this, you need to have it buried very quickly. So it's not just a drowning, it's also a quick burial. And it's also important to put this into context. This is one of the things which we love. This is one of the reasons why we love to take people out on field trips, is because they can come out and actually see these fossils in their context. It's not just a dinosaur that you find here. It's also all the trees that have been ripped up and smashed and buried next to it. It's all the fish that are buried next to it. It's all the rolled amber balls and the smooth pebbles that can only be formed by water that are smashed up next to it. And so really we are dealing with a flooded environment, which a flood has come in and it has swept up all the sea creatures and all the smooth pebbles and has buried the dinosaurs and ripped up the trees and buried them all together in a mass flood dump. So it really is important when you're doing this research not just to look at the one fossil, as exciting and amazing as the dinosaur fossils are. It's important to take a step back and look at the whole of the geological aspect in context as to what else is buried there. So do come along to a creation research field trip, because it is well worth getting up close and personal with the fossils. So this then this is a common pose throughout the world. And it's not just, this is from Canada, so it's not just from Canada, it's in the US, it's in the UK, it's Australia, we've dug up dinosaurs, and there's still the same pose over there. So and they're all in the same layer. So we're dealing with a worldwide flooded, catastrophic process which has produced these dinosaur fossils for sure, and that's something that is really quite important when to look at. All right, well, Diane, let's look at an unusual dinosaur now. This is our most recent cast that we got from a fairly new dinosaur that has been only discovered in the last few years. And what is this creature here?
Yes, this is Draco Rex, which is a word that actually means dragon, as in Draco. So Draco Rex, I believe it's Draco Rex Hogswartsia, which tells you what paleontologists read in their spare time, the sort of strange occultic side of things. But anyway, the reason why I say this was called basically Draco Rex, the King Dragon, or the Dragon King. What was it called that? Well, because it looks like a archetypal picture of a dragon, which is a sort of stereotypical dragon. It is very fairy tale-esque. But this is a real fossil?
It's a real fossil, yes. And there's a couple of examples in museums around the world. I believe, and I'm willing to be very much corrected on this, but I believe we are the first UK museum to have a cast of a Draco Rex like this. So it's a pretty spectacular creature with the horns and everything and the beak.
Excrescences.
It really is. So just briefly talking, because we dealt with dragons in a whole programme last year, and we may not have time to go into as much depth this year, but really we shouldn't be surprised that we see independent accounts of very similarly depicted dinosaur / dragons in various cultures around the world, particularly if, as the Bible says, dinosaurs were made on day 6, same as mankind, because we'd expect to see depictions of these dragons around the world if they really did live with man and if they really did go on Noah's Ark. That's what we should expect.
Yes, and just about every culture in the world has legends about dragons. And Some of them are a bit fanciful, but that's what happens when things disappear and die out. The memories get blunted, people start to embellish them, but there is a basis of truth. And it's there in just about every culture in the world.
And many of them, while, as you say, they are sort of fanciful and clearly bended and twisted truth, a lot of them have much more in common with historical accounts than they do with legends or stories. And so you need to try and, again, take it in the context of what account is being given here. But we really shouldn't be surprised that the majority of these depictions of dragons match fairly closely with dinosaur type depictions that as we understand them today. And I think Dracorex is a very good example of that. Well, let's talk about trace fossils then, Diane. So trace fossils are fossils that are not part of the actual animal, but are evidence of where that animal
has been.
So what's this trace fossil like
so we've got a footprint here. So we find lots of fossilized footprints, actually. And again, they're more examples of things that have to be formed quickly.
Yeah, well, what would happen, if the next tide came in before you have a chance to bury them, right? It's just going to disappear and go through it. So, you do need to bury any kind of trace footprint, because I think a lot of the times the traces of animals are much less obvious, shall we say, than the actual animal itself. It's like footprints will get covered up and destroyed. Stuff like, feces, like this sort of fossil dinosaur poo here, or coprolite as we call it. Well, anybody who works with animals or knows anything about biology knows this doesn't hang around for very long.
No.
It goes off. Well, it's not the nicest of condition when it first comes out, but it gets destroyed and rots away pretty quickly in the grand scheme of things. So you're never going to have this lying around for vast periods of time waiting to be buried. No.
In fact, it's designed to be recycled, and there are little creatures that will come along and do that.
Yes,
and very quickly come along and do that.
And this is actually quite common. You find a lot of this. And some of you might be asking, well, how do we know that this is fossil dinosaur poop? It's quite simple. Oftentimes, it's actually more common than you would perhaps think. When you find complete dinosaur skeletons like this, they're often so well preserved, they still have gut content in their stomach. Sometimes, because of the drowning and the squishing, they actually have vomit that's coming up out of their throat, and you can also find this gut content down by their backside as well. So once you know what that gut content looks like, because it's quite distinctive inside the dinosaur, you know if you ever find it outside of the dinosaur where it once came from. So that's how we can tell with things like coprolite is the proper term. So, and then we've got things like this, Diane. What are we dealing with here as another trace fossil, technically?
Well, this is an egg. And
this is one of those Hadrosaurus dinosaur eggs. So what is something fascinating about eggs in regards to how often do we find your babies inside of them?
Well, if we have modern techniques where we can actually scan these, and sometimes they do have embryos in them, but a lot of times they don't.
So what could be a reason for that when we find so many of these eggs without embryos inside of them?
Well, sometimes reptiles, when they are stressed, will actually just shed their eggs, even though the eggs have been formed inside the female.
But they've never been fertilised or developed, certainly. No, so really, when we find dinosaurs with eggs or dinosaur eggs that have been purposefully laid in a nest, that's clearly time has been taken to build the nest and to look after it, and we will sometimes find the embryos in them. But one observation that I've made is that often you find these eggs just randomly just lying around. There's very little evidence of care, there's very little evidence of nesting. They're just sort of randomly lying there, and so it's almost as if the dinosaurs have been under stress and have quickly expelled their eggs in order to give themselves a faster getaway, which is something we see with a lot of reptiles. They may be gravid for months. So it's interesting that even things like eggs and the fact that you find very few embryos developed inside them can give good evidence that these dinosaurs were under great stress, probably because of a global flood that was coming after them.
Well, animals are very sensitive to oncoming disasters.
Absolutely,
Yes.
yeah. And so it's, again, you've got to try and get it all in the big context. Take a bit of a step back and look at the big context of things. All right, well, let's talk about one more thing, Diane, before we finish this episode. I just want to talk about teeth, because we've got our juvenile T-Rex jaw here, and yes, this is a juvenile, so they did get quite big. These dinosaurs would get very large, and we've got an actual real tooth here of the so-called African T-Rex, so in the same family as our T-Rex here. Now, when it comes to things like teeth, we often assume that when you're dealing with a T-Rex with these big teeth with serrated edges, and you can see even in the fossil one, you've still got this kind of serrated edge here, this kind of three-sided tooth, a strong tooth designed for sort of stabbing and slicing. We often assume that it is there because the creature was a meat eater, or rather it requires teeth because it ate meat. So is that always the case with what we're dealing with in terms of these sharp-teethed creatures?
Well, having sharp teeth does not make a creature a savage killer. It means that it can cut meat if it has the opportunity to do so, but it does not prove that it is a savage killer, because there are other animals that do have sharp teeth and serrated edges that don't eat meat. After all, a sharp knife, if you think of the sort of analogy, is just as good for cutting up vegetables as it is for cutting up meat. So the same applies to teeth.
Yes. In fact, if you think about your main serrated knives, they're things like bread and
That's right.
and hard stuff. So okay. So do we have examples then of creatures with sharp teeth that don't eat meat?
Well, a fruit bat would be a good example of that, because they have really sharp teeth. The panda bear, which is not actually a bear but a panda, eats bamboo. I remember seeing one of these at the Adelaide Zoo, and it was given this great big heap of bamboo to eat, and it just sat there. It was like watching a garden muncher, you know, those that make mulch out of you prunings. So sharp teeth are very useful for eating plant material.
Yes. Okay, so we are dealing with sharp teeth. So what can sharp teeth tell us then? They just tell us how an animal eats. Yeah,
basically, yes. It's used for cutting and slicing, but it doesn't tell you what it cut or sliced.
So you have your sort of hard, sharp serrated teeth, which are for cutting and slicing. You've got your sort of rounded pointy teeth, like your Spinosaurus teeth, which are for stabbing. And then you have, of course, things like your flat teeth, like we've got our Edmontosaurus tooth here. There's the teeth that go down into the jaw. Look, there's the tooth plate. So you've got these teeth which are there for grinding, not for slicing. So it's different techniques, or different teeth for different techniques of eating, but not necessarily different types of food in terms of meat versus vegetables, because there's huge variety in the types of vegetables that you eat, whether it's your grass or your fruits or so on and so forth. So you do need these sharp teeth sometimes to be able to even survive in eating vegetables. I think one classic example, which I know I've had experience with, is the great green iguanas, right, which have serrated backward pointing teeth, and I was munched on by a green iguana in my days as a zookeeper. It slices through your flesh easily, and blood going everywhere, you know, and yet they're 100% vegetarian. In fact, one of the episodes we'd like to do actually will be about things like venom. And talking about that side of things, because it turns out that green iguanas and things like your Australian bearded dragons are actually mildly venomous. It's a mild form of rattlesnake venom, and you've got to ask yourself, well, what is a 100% vegetarian and an 80% vegetarian lizard doing with venom? And the answer is what venom is designed to do, which is not to kill, but to digest and to use that digestion process. And it's just as effective in plants as it is in meat. And in fact, when you get bitten by a rattlesnake or by your lovely tiger snakes and the like in Australia, you don't die because it's essentially designed to kill you. You die because it's digesting you, and death is an end result of digestion. So yes, we have to remember the process of digestion starts in the mouth. And so that physical digestion is the actual chewing and biting process, but in some animals the chemical digestion starts in the mouth as well. And so it goes back to this as we've been really talking about in pretty much every episode, this kind of good to bad to worse. Right? Sharp teeth don't equal a vicious killer, but there's lots of evidence to suggest that T-Rex did end up eating meat. And there's lots of evidence to suggest that lots of these animals end up eating meat, and we see animals eating meat today. But that's not because that's what they were designed to do. It's because of this breakdown of ecosystems. It's this good to bad to worse account. It's this very good world which has been marred by sin, and as a result of the curse, the world has gone downhill, and out of necessity, creatures have started to eat meat. And you can see examples of that even in the world today, of this good to bad to worse process with regards to animals now being required to eat meat in order to be able to survive.
Yes, animals know when they need extra protein or extra particular nutrients in their diet, and they will go after them and take advantage of whatever opportunity presents itself.
A good example of that would be mosquitoes.
Yes.
The males don't drink blood.
No, they don't. The females put the bite on you, as it were, but they're only doing it when they come to reproduce. They particularly need iron to lay eggs and a bit of extra protein. Normally mosquitoes live on plant juices because all they need is the energy. So they will drink nectar and they will use their proboscis to suck plant juices, and that's fine. But the females, when they need those extra nutrients to lay their eggs, they will go seeking that. And human skin happens to be easily available. Yes.
You can get that iron and the hemoglobin that they need from plants.
Oh, yes.
Just if you need an abundance of it, particularly when driven by a climate, you end up with vast quantities of mosquitoes looking for hemoglobin at the same time. The ecosystem can just not provide that for them, so they're going to turn to the next easiest, source, which is us.
Yes, well, that's right. We're an easy target. Our skin, being bare, is easy to get to, so our blood vessels are easy to get to. The mosquitoes just go for whatever's the easiest target. And we have to remember that from the beginning of the world, the plants have gone downhill as well. So they will have lost their nutrients. Some have gone extinct, some have shrunk. We know that from the fossil record. The fossil record of plants was actually much better. And they were more lush, they were larger, and they've probably lost some of their nutrition value as well.
Well, Diane, there's so much that we could talk and deal with about dinosaurs. We're going to have to go on to do another program. So do join us next week as we continue in the world of dinosaurs, and we'll get on to fascinating discoveries like soft tissue and questionable discoveries like feathered dinosaurs as well. So be sure to join us next week. Check out Creation Research Live, our all-new streaming service for creation research, with thousands of free resources and access to all of Creation Research's premium documentaries, debates and presentations through a low-cost monthly subscription. Find out more at creationresearch.live. Got questions? We've got answers. Check out askjohnmackay.com to see Q&A articles by experts from around the world. See also the creationfactfile.com website for latest evidence news from creation research. Be sure to sign up to the Creation Evidence News, regular updates and news from the world of creation research, science and the latest evidence for creation. Watch Creation Research TV, a live 24/7 broadcast of everything creation research, available for free on our YouTube channel and through Creation Research Live. Support creation research through tax-deductible giving in many countries. Find out more at creationresearch.net. Be sure to join us for Creation Conversations, a weekly live broadcast with the whole Creation Research team, dealing with different topics from creation, evolution, and the Bible.